Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 264, Menexenus 235b. The last sentence was very long, but Socrates still hasn't finished explaining why dying in war is a fine thing. It turns out that the fine thing is actually the eulogy. It makes the funeral fine and magnificent, and even poor and worthless soldiers are made to appear praiseworthy. This is because the eulogy does praise them, whether they deserve it or not. And then everybody else is praised, their forefathers, the city, and especially the citizens who are still alive, who end up with a feeling of greatness. As Socrates says, they have been charmed by the speaker. And this isn't any old speaker, this is an orator, someone well-versed in rhetoric. Socrates now emphasizes just how much he is affected by adding an audience whose own reaction heightens his own. Kai hoia de ta polla ae metemu xenoitines hepontai kai sun acroontai prosus egos semnoteros ento parachrema gignomai. And as with many such things, always with me, some xenoi follow and listen together with me, to whom I become more solemn on the spot. That is, after listening to one of these eulogies, Socrates even appears to others to be more solemn or more august, we could say. But he only appears like this to xenoi, not to fellow citizens, presumably because they are all suffering the same delusion that he is suffering from. Only the xenoi, who are guests in Athens, they are not citizens of Athens. These are the only people who would look up to the Athenians in a different light following one of these eulogies. We don't have to take Socrates seriously that he is always accompanied by xenoi to these eulogies. It's just that only xenoi will do to make this point. Socrates even spells this out, as indeed one would expect in a rhetorical account aimed at the many. That is to say, Socrates is giving Menexenus an example of a rhetorical account aimed at the many. What's interesting about this particular rhetorical example is that it exposes the mechanisms within rhetoric, something we would never see in a real rhetorical eulogy. This then is how Socrates explains the reaction of the xenoi. Kaigar ekenoi tauta toku moid paschen kai proseme kai prosten allen polin Thomas eoteranauten hegestaenai e proteron, hupotulegontos anapethomenoi. For those too seem to me to suffer these same things, both with regard to me and with regard to the rest of the city, the polis. They seem to think that it is more wonderful than before, being completely persuaded by the speaker. The key to the reaction of the xenoi is in the participle anapethomenoi, being completely persuaded. The task of rhetoric, the goal of rhetoric, is persuasion, and they are persuaded. But not only that, Socrates has added the prefix ana, which in rare cases, and I think this is one of them, he means completely persuaded. Otherwise it would have just meant persuaded again, or persuaded around to a certain point of view, but here it does seem to mean completely, thoroughly. When it comes to Athens, the xenoi have not had their overall attitude towards Athens changed, but simply amplified. They thought that Athens was wonderful, but now they think that it is more wonderful. I wonder whether the same could be said for their attitude towards Socrates. Given that rhetoric can alter perceptions, we might imagine that it would be very useful in education as much as in propaganda. We might need to imagine again after what Socrates says next. Kai moi haute hesemnotes paramene hemeras pleo e tres, hutos enaulos hologos te kai hophthongos paratu legontos enduetais ta ota, hostemogis tetarte e pempte hemera animimnescomai emautu, kai aisthanomai huges emi, teos te oimai monon uken makaron nesois oiken, hutos heimin hoi rhetores dexioiesen. And this solemnity or augustness stays with me more than 3 days. So memorably do the logos and the sound of the speaker enter the ears that hardly on the 4th or 5th day do I recall myself and sense which land I am in. Until then, I think I'm all but living on the Isles of the Blessed. So dexterous are our orators. Would it be fair to say that Socrates is parodying rhetoric or satirizing the eulogists, or is he simply exemplifying rhetoric, while at the same time he's actually telling us a few truths? The point of the eulogy is not to praise where praise is due, but to influence the opinions of the people listening to the eulogy, to make the audience believe that Athens is greater than it really is, and that it's worth considering dying in war in order to receive such a fine thing as a eulogy like this. Menexenus, at least, doesn't think that Socrates is being all that serious. Ei, su prospaides, O Socrates, tus rhetoras. You, Socrates, are always making fun of the orators. Menexenus seems to have taken exception to Socrates' lack of respect for the orators. All Socrates has done, in effect, is criticize the orators for their inability to speak the truth because they are obliged to persuade. Socrates also suggests that their ability to persuade is great, but temporary. Such criticisms, if true, would reduce the importance of orators. I think that Menexenus doesn't take Socrates that seriously, and therefore simply says that Socrates is always making fun of the orators. Menexenus, however, does take them seriously, and for this reason he has a serious concern, and he's about to tell Socrates what his concern is. Nun mentoi oimai ego ton hierethenta upanu euporesen. But now I think that the one chosen will not quite have the resources. Menexenus uses the verb euporeo, which is the opposite of aporeo, which is cognate with the noun aporia, an inability to provide an answer, or simply a lack of answers. Euporia is therefore a good supply of topics, or simply a good supply of words within the number of topics the speaker chooses to raise. This is how Menexenus explains his concern. Ex hypogeu gar pantapas in he hairesis gegonen, hostesos anankasthesetai holegon hosper autos chediadzen. For the choice, the election, has happened completely out of the blue, so that perhaps the speaker will be forced, as it were, to speak off the cuff. The problem Menexenus sees then is not that the speaker will lack topics, but preparation, which not only has to do with topics and the arrangement of topics, but also the arrangement of words within topics. Evidently, Menexenus hasn't learnt very much rhetoric. Luckily, he has that famous orator Socrates to put him right. Pothen ogethe, esin hekastois tuton logoi pariscios menoi, kai hama ude autos chediadze en tagetoi auta chalepon. Nonsense, good person. I actually suspect that this is an early instance of agathos in its more modern sense of gullible. The modern word for good is kalos, which then was beautiful or fine. So, what are you talking about, you gullible person? Each of them has prepared logoi, where logoi can be words or speeches. And at the same time, it's not difficult for them to speak off the cuff about such things. Emen gardeoi Athenaius en Peloponnesiois iulegen, e Peloponnesius en Athenaios, agathuan rhetoros deoi tu pesontos kai eudokimesontos. For if there was a need to speak well of Athenians among the Peloponnesians, or to speak well of the Peloponnesians among the Athenians, there would be a need of a good orator, the one who could persuade and who would appear good, or possibly one who already has a good reputation. Hotandetis en tutois agonidze tai husper kai paine, uten megadokeniu legen. But whenever someone speaks publicly among those whom he praises, it isn't a great thing to be thought to be speaking well. Uk oie, O Socrates? Do you really not think so, Socrates? Menexenus is so naive that he must still be quite young, but old enough to be allowed into the Bouleuterion.